Okay, for the first time, maybe not the first time, but we're going to get started right on time. It's 11 a.m. my time, much later through Europe and Zurich in particular. And I'd just like to welcome everybody today to our presentation. My name is Steve Buser. I'm a psychiatrist here from Asheville, North Carolina, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Asheville Jung Center. This is our 27th seminar. So we've been doing these for quite a while now, and so far things have gone quite well. We're real pleased with the way this project has developed. We have around 150 people joining us, both live in the two locations today, as well as many more across the internet. We have over 12 countries joining today, which include Canada, France, India, Israel, Japan, Norway, Russia, Slovenia, Sweden, Switzerland, United Kingdom, and United States. So that's the list so far. And again, we are just very honored to have people from around the world joining today. That's been such a delightful piece of this. Do visit our website, ashevillejungcenter.org. On that, you'll find live seminars like today's, recorded seminars, web streaming seminars. We have continuing education, social media, Twitter, Facebook. We have a large library of DVDs available, as well as written transcripts. We'd like to announce two upcoming seminars briefly. One is Saturday, June 9th. That will be a webinar, and I'll describe the difference in a moment. That webinar will be from the C.G. Jung Institute of San Francisco, which is another partner that's helped out some. And that will be with Mark Sullivan on approaching infinity, contemporary analytic work with the spiritual perspective. Then on June 28th, we have a rather large event happening. That will be a multi-site. We're going to include 4 active sites. Asheville, of course, as the hub, Zurich, Switzerland, Northern England, and Sonoma, California. And what that will be is an overall topic called Carl Jung and Neuroscience. We'll have Murray Stein also give an hour or so lecture from Switzerland. We're going to have Margaret Wilkinson from Northern England do another piece on neuroscience. We'll take a break for an hour, then we'll have another 3 hours towards the end, which will be live from Sonoma, California. And that will dovetail with the IASD, the International Association for the Study of Dreams. They're having a large conference in Berkeley, and they're going to take the best of their presenters, drive them to Sonoma, and they'll give us a highlights talk from California. So that should be a real special event if people can come to it. Just to let people know, there's 2 formats we have now, webinars and video seminars. Video seminars are what we're doing today, and they are a classic format. We've been doing these for a number of years now. They're high technology, high-end, live video streams, usually from Zurich or other prestigious sites. They're university-based. And then we're having other ones called webinars. They're PowerPoint primarily, so they're PowerPoint-based, usually have a higher level of PowerPoint presentation with an audio voiceover with those. They're often shorter, 2 hours, sometimes longer. They're more interactive. You can open microphones. People can talk directly from computers anywhere around the world, and you can send in chats. But they're a different feel. But do try both if you would. Quick thanks to a few folks. We have the University of North Carolina, Asheville, which is where I'm seated today. We'd like to thank the Department of Psychology for hosting, as well as the Distance Learning Center, where we're broadcasting from. There's the NC-REN system out of the Research Triangle Park near Raleigh. They are our technical center. They're the ones that hub this throughout the rest of the world for us today. We'd like to thank the ETH University, which is also known as the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. That is where Paul and Murray are speaking from today, and they've been very helpful in helping host these as well. The ETH, by the way, is where Carl Jung himself taught, so it's got a nice history to it as well. And lastly, we'd like to thank ISAP Zurich, which stands for the International School of Analytical Psychology, and that's where both Murray and Paul are supervising training analysts, and they've been very gracious to loan us their faculty through most of these projects. A few quick housekeeping items before we introduce Murray and Paul. One, we are required to announce that we have no commercial support for presenters, topics, or programs. There is no pharmaceutical industry support of any kind associated with us today. We will be sending out a survey later today or tomorrow for all those who have registered. Please take a moment and give us your feedback on what we can do better and what worked well. And particularly for the continuing education folks, it's required that you complete a survey for your certificate. Please know that if you are at the ETH or UNCA, And if you ask a question, your voice will be recorded on the DVD version of this, so don't ask a question if you don't want your voice recorded, but you can pass those in writing to myself or to Murray, and we can read those questions. For the home viewers, we always get a few volume control questions. Remember, there are 3 ways to adjust your volume on your computer. One is through our web streamer. There'll be a small button in the lower right-hand corner. The other is most computers have a system volume control, often in the right-hand corner of the desktop. And of course, if you have a speaker, you might have a dial on that. So don't call us with a volume question until you've checked all 3 to make sure those are optimized. There are ask a question, little dialogue buttons. Click on those to send me a question, which I can then read to Paul and Murray. And for that, you might need to be out of the full screen setting. There's a full screen which optimizes your size, but to ask a question, you have to switch that. And also note the swap media button, which will move the PowerPoint and the video back and forth. Turn off any cell phones if you're at a live site, and we'll be 3 hours in total with a 15-minute break. The schedule, as some of you overheard, will be approximately 30-minute intro with Murray, then a 60-minute presentation by Paul, a few questions, then a break. Then we'll have another 30 to 45-minute piece with Murray, followed by the remainder of the time with discussion and questions. So Murray Stein, most of you know Murray Stein. He needs very little introduction, but I'll do it anyway. He has been our anchor presenter for the majority of our talks, a wonderful presenter. He was the president of the International School of Analytical Psychology, just stepped down a few weeks ago, but is still very actively involved there and is a supervising training analyst as well. He has been president of the International Association for Analytical Psychology, the main governing organization, author, writer, speaker, and again, very gifted in those areas, which you'll see today. Paul Brucci is also a veteran of our programming. He did our pillar of psychotherapy looking at active imagination. That's about 3 years ago, but he was involved with that. He also played Carl Jung in our Jung White Letters, and he did just a phenomenal performance of that. He's got the great Basler Swiss accent, which you'll notice today, and fits very well with the Carl Jung themes. He has studied philosophy and psychology at the University of Zurich. He is former president of the Swiss Society of Analytical Psychology, the C.G. Jung Institute Zurich, as well as ISAP Zurich. His special interests include art and picture interpretation, which you will notice today will be quite useful. So without further ado, we will turn this over to Paul and Murray. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. Once again, we are with the Red Book, very weighty and significant work by C.G. Jung, recently published, 2009, to worldwide astonishment and acclaim. The book has sold way beyond the quite conservative estimates that the publisher and most of us had at the beginning. The latest figures I've heard are something in the range of 100,000 copies in circulation today that have been sold by the publisher Norton and Company. It's a beautiful book. It's an exciting book, and it's a book mostly not read. Quite difficult to read the text of the book. It's daunting, it's hard to get into, hard to understand once you've gotten into it. But I think the big draw, commercial draw, reason it sold so well, is that it contains such beautiful paintings that Jung inserted into his Red Book diary, journal, if you will. And that will be the focus of our seminar today. In previous 2 seminars, we looked at the narrative, at the storyline, the way in which the drama, the inner drama that Jung encounters as he goes into himself and into his own internal world develops, and the various figures that he encounters, and the themes and the meanings that Jung derived from those. we didn't pay very much attention to the pictures. And that will be the focus of our seminar today. And Paul Brucci, who is an expert in picture interpretation, teaches courses on that subject, formerly at the Jung Institute and now at ISAP. Is well known for his great skill, his appreciation of art, and his skill at interpreting pictures of painting, of patients, and now he'll take a look at some of the pictures of the Red Book. Before we get there, I would just like to set the scene a little bit, and if we could have Chris, can you give us the second screen? There we go. Set the stage a bit and remind you a little of the background and the history of the Red Book as it unfolds. This is called the Red Book Timeline, and I'm very grateful to my friend and colleague in Colorado, John Atkinson, for developing this timeline and the two slides that will follow from this. What this shows you is basically the dates of the composition of the Red Book through the scrutinies draft. And this is the timeline of the text, not the timeline of the pictures. But there you see that the story begins with the difficulties that Freud and Jung were having with each other. They break off their personal relationship in January of 1913 with an exchange of rather sharp letters. And then in October of 1913, Jung has some very strange visionary experiences. He's riding on a train from Schaffhausen to Zurich, and suddenly he sees an image of Europe in a catastrophic situation with floods and a river of blood flooding into Europe up to the Alps. It scares him. He doesn't know what it means, but he knows there's some inner disturbance going on. There's a further exchange with Freud, and on October 27th, he resigns as the editor of the Psychoanalytic Yearbook and really begins to withdraw substantially from his involvement in psychoanalysis. And then he begins this journey into his inner world through the use of what he would later call active imagination, and that was to open himself to images or figures that would appear from within as he sat at his desk in the evenings in his home, his office in Küsnacht, and record what these experiences were in his black book. So you have the black book entries for what is called Liber Primus and Liber Secundus, the first two parts of the Red Book. Really the bulk of the Red Book itself, as Jung composed it with the calligraphic text and the painted pictures. He does not finish his entire text, putting the entire text that he has in manuscript form into the Red Book. But the first two parts, called Liber Primus and Liber Secundus, that we have reviewed before, are composed and put into the Black Book. Black Books between November 12th of 1913 and April 19th of 1913. And immediately he begins the Black Book entries then for the third part of the published Red Book, called Scrutinies in the English version. On April 20th, 1914, he resigns his position as president of the International Psychoanalytic Association, and a week or so later, 10 days later, he also pulls back from his involvement at the University of Zurich. He resigns from the medical faculty and is no longer a part of the staff of the Burghölzli Clinic. He, in the meantime, has set up a private practice in his home in Küsnacht. And of course, we know that on August 1st, 1914, World War I starts, and when World War I begins, Jung is relieved, in a sense, to know that these visionary experiences of a catastrophe in Europe weren't simply a subjective image of his own inner turmoil or possible breakdown, which worried him quite a lot at the time because there were such strong visionary experiences and images, but actually were a kind of precognitive sense of what was coming in Europe. Not that he was alone in thinking that there was something brewing in Europe at that time. It came to him in a visionary form, and he didn't at first link it so much to the political and social situation. When the war broke out, he could see that there was a connection, and it relieved him of the thought that maybe this was representing an internal breakdown that would come to him personally. He was going through a chaotic and critical time in his life, a midlife crisis, but it wasn't nearly as catastrophic as that vision would have indicated if that were diagnostic of his own psychic condition. And then from between 1914 and 1930, roughly, he works with the material that he gathered during these experiences and puts them into a textual form. He adds some layers of reflection, interpretation, and then begins in about 1915, 1916 to copy them into what he calls the Red Book itself. It's a leather-bound volume about this size, not quite as thick, maybe about the same size as this published version. This is a facsimile copy of the Red Book, so the pages that you see in here of the calligraphic text and so on are actually photographs of his Red Book itself. These are very carefully photographed by the publisher, and so what we have in this published version is a facsimile edition of his Red Book itself, plus, of course, the commentary, the footnotes by the editor Sonu Shamdasani, and also the translation of the German text in the English version. And that's plus a couple of appendices is what we have in the published version of the Red Book. About 1928 or so, he stops working on the Red Book and turns his attention to alchemy. And he felt that alchemy would be a suitable vehicle for transforming some of the deep experiences and insights that he had gathered together in the Red Book into another language. And so a lot of the alchemy works are a kind of restatement almost of the transformation process that he experienced during the Red Book period, since alchemy is about the transformation from something less valuable to something more valuable, from lead into gold and so on, going through various stages of a process. He saw this as a kind of earlier antique version of what he also had experienced in his Red Book period, and so he turns to alchemy and uses that as a kind of vehicle for presenting his psychological insights to the world. That plus his theoretical works that took form in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s were a restatement in psychological language and another kind of metaphor of basically what he had discovered about the psyche in his Red Book period. If we could have the next slide, please. Now, this gives you a sense, again, from John Atkinson's research. He put this together. The intensity of the entries and the frequency of the entries beginning in November of 1913, spiking up in January of 1914, and then falling off a bit in February, and then April and May. Those were the major entries that make up Liber Primus and Liber Secundus. And so you can see that in January it was almost every other day, 16 days of the 30 days of the month. Very intense period, and then falling off. And then there's a quiet time from May of 1914. He's resigned his various positions, and he's begun to rework the text. The unconscious is quiet. There are no further experiences or images during that time, no further active imaginations. And then in June of 1915, it begins again. And in the fall of 1915, in September, some more material appears. Philemon appears, comes back to him. The soul comes back to him. And then again, with a lot of intensity, in December, January, and February of 1916, a lot of entries. And this is the heart of scrutinies in that period. From December through February of 1916, he has the important dialogues with Philemon, with Soul, and the 7 Sermons to the Dead appear in late January and early February of 1916. Very important material in his inner experience. And then April, May, and June, some more comes, and it finishes off with the final scene, which is in the Garden of Philemon, the very end of Scrutinies, where a blue figure in blue appears. It's identified as Christ in the footnotes, and there is a dialogue between Philemon, Jung, and the Christ figure, and then the Red Book ends on a note that he who can accept the worm can also accept me, Christ says. And the worm, we will see later what that indicates, but it's a part of wholeness as Jung discovered it, and as he put it into his mandala of 1916, which comes in that very intense period, also 1916, January of 1916, where he creates the mandala called Systema Munditotius, which I will discuss after the break later. Could we have the next slide, please? So these are the Black Book entries, and these are the Red Book paintings. Now, what you'll discover if you look at the paintings in relation to the text is that at times there's a very close connection of the painting to the text, as though the painting is meant to illustrate the text or illustrate an active imagination that Jung was having at the time, some of the figures that he was engaged with, as you'll see in a moment. And at other times, there is a scant relationship of the images to the text. It's as though the images, in my view, kind of take on a life of their own, and they have their own story. After a while, they get going in a direction that doesn't match the text altogether, and you can see how that happens. His paintings, great frequency in 1915, 16, 17, but as I showed just a moment ago, the actual entries into the Black Books that constitute the text of this stop in the summer of 1916, but the paintings go on quite intensively after that. 1917, a lot of paintings, 18, 19, and then into the 1920s, all the way to presumably 1930, which is maybe the last painting. That's the painting with all the faces. I don't know if you're going to deal with that, Paul. All the faces. That's the last painting that he puts into the Red Book, approximately 1930. And then he puts the Red Book aside and doesn't touch it again, except maybe to show it to a few friends, colleagues, to discuss it with some people. But he basically doesn't do anything further with it until very close to the end of his life. I believe it's 1959 or so. He again picks up the pen and he tries to complete it. And he starts, and after a page or so, he leaves off, and he realizes that he can't take it any further, that it will have to, he'll have to be satisfied with what is there. That very last painting that he does, it's dated here as 1930, with all the faces, Paul will discuss later. Some people have thought he might have done in the 1950s. It's unclear from what I can gather, at least talking to various people about this, if he made an attempt to take it a little bit further sometime in the 1950s, before the very end that is indicated, where he picks up his pen and tries to finish it in 1959. And that last painting may have come in the 1950s, or it may be from 1930. So this dating is somewhat approximate. It's based on references in the text. But again, you can see that there is a high level of frequency that tapers off, but flows into the 1920s, quiet in 1926, picks up again a little bit in 27 and 28, and then stops after about 1930. So this is the flow of the material that goes into the Red Book. It's a multi-layered work, with at the foundation being Jung's experiences, and then there's the recording of the experiences in the black books, and then there is creation of a manuscript, a revised manuscript with some commentary and further reflections. That goes through a couple of revisions, and then the paintings start coming in. So the Red Book itself is not a simple text to read. You have to pay a lot of attention to dates if you want to be correct about the history of it. In the end, it might not make so much difference when he did what, because it has a life of its own and a flow that exists in the narrative structure and in the pictures. And we probably get the most benefit by reading it for its content and what it suggests to us. But I wanted to give you this historical background just to give you an idea of how to place this within the frame of Jung's entire opus and his life and his work. This comes during his midlife period, 1915. He's 35, 40 years old in 1915. So between the age of 40 and the age of 55 in 1930, he's doing most of the work on the Red Book, on this volume that we have here, although the material for it, some of the material came a year earlier. So with that, I think I'll wind up my introduction and come back later to speak about the Systema Mundatotius, the mandala from the year 1916, and turn the camera and the microphone over to Paul Britchie, who will give us his lecture on the pictures. Paul?
Thank you, Murray.
I'll put this picture up there for you.
You have created a helpful basis for what I'm to say now. I will give a kind of a reading of some chosen pictures of the Red Book. All in all, the Red Book contains 73 pictures. This number actually takes into account only the pictures that stand out by their important size. The huge amount of pictorial material shows clearly the importance Jung attributed to the creation of images in their confrontation with the unconscious. Images were obviously for him much more than simple ornamentations of his text. There are also pictures which have only that function to embellish it, but mostly, and particularly it's valid for the big pictures, they have their own meaning. They are bearers of valuable autonomous meaning. If one observes the totality of the pictorial material spread all through the Red Book, one perceives difference in faces, one from the other. One can discover different sections in the book. These are distinguishable by the fact that they contain several pictures related to each other by common characteristics of style or by their content. Well, I will limit my reading of the book to 8 pictures. They convey something about the different dimensions of the soul experience in which Jung immersed himself all through this creation of the Red Book. And we start here with the first one. That image is an initial D on the very first page of the Red Book. It is the first letter of the title, Der Weg des Kommenden, the way of what is to come. The sweeping D includes 3 levels. Is it possible to use this pointer? I don't know. No.
If you want to go to yours.
No. We have the upper part in the image with the celestial bodies and the astrological signs of the zodiac. You see that it's the very upper, yeah, here. Then the lower part, the level of water, with all sorts of fish and sea vegetation, as well as the underlying volcanic crust. In between, what Murray just now shows here, in between a Swiss landscape with a medieval town, in the foothills of the Alps with city walls, and in front of it, on the beach, an old sailing ship equipped for the crossing of the ocean. What is expressed in the title of the chapter acknowledges the Red Book itself as a path of experience, der Weg des Kommenden, the way of what will come. Here we see also, it's interesting to look into the details because they are very meaningful. There's a ship ready to set sail, which is equipped for a long journey. The journey leads not just to the nearest shore of Lake Zurich, but evoking the Santa Maria of Christopher Columbus, it leads to the discovery of a new continent. The starting point is what he leaves behind is a secure world, we could say, when we see this town, a secure world with stable values and traditional moral rules contained in a very closed collective, represented by the church, the castle and town walls. The picture seems to suggest that this trip that is about to start is anything but an enjoyable cruise. It will require letting go of the individual's strong convictions and irrefutable certainties, or what is contained symbolically in this structured world of a medieval, secure Swiss town. The red flag under which the ship will be sailing is not the Swiss flag. If it were the case, we could say this journey would not lead very far. The red color of the flag makes us think rather of the Red Book. The Red Book had for Jung a meaning similar to the flag on a ship. A flag reveals the identity of the operator of the ship and his nationality, as we know. Therefore, because of its symbolic connection with the flag, the Red Book is to be understood as something that helped Jung to own a posteriori the experience he had previously developed in the Black Books, and to make it visible and recognizable as something of value for the collective. the experience that is about to be developed will not be drawn only from the mainland in the middle part of the picture, from which the ship is departing. It will be drawn also from the upper and lower areas that are included in the image. Perhaps we'll make it bigger once again.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we see a sky with clouds, and over it the universe with its stars. And we see a lake that leads into the depths of the sea and the seabed. The familiar atmosphere of the individual's inner world, the sphere of the personal consciousness and unconscious, is being expanded to reach a dimension that goes beyond the personal realm. It includes this archetypal level at the top and the collective unconscious very down at the lower part of the image. The view opens up into space where superpersonal factors, archetypal ideas, and time constellations are operating. And it plunges into the depths of the collective unconscious, where the archaic structures, we can hardly see it, and the ordering factors of the psychic fundaments are present. Very good. Jung's journey seems not to be defined only in terms of his own lifetime, but to come within the scope of a much wider collective time horizon. It is undertaken in the service of what is to come. The star that appears in the upper right corner here, which symbolically refers to the future, the right upper side, and that is reminiscent of the Star of Bethlehem, points to an important event in which something new announces itself, something that wants to incarnate. In this journey towards what is to come, both the upper and lower realms are involved. The personal consciousness, perhaps the whole image, and unconscious, as well as the collective consciousness and unconscious, have each a formative influence. The bringing into relationship of both levels is precisely what constitutes active imagination. And it is that which Jung practices in his Red Book with an immense patience and perseverance. The capital D includes in its large arch both levels, the level of mind, consciousness, and meaning on the one hand at the top, and the level of the image of the unconscious and of sensuality on the other hand. This seems to affirm from the very beginning the method that will bring forth the whole experience of the Red Book. The curve of the D, like a kind of a sail puffed up by the wind, provides a visible expression of the transcendent function, which plays an essential role in the mediation of these opposites. It's also the transcendent function, as we know, which leads beyond previous perspectives, which transcends previous self-evident concepts, and opens the mind to the new awareness of what is to come. Now, a last detail represented in the image. Perhaps we can change now from to here. Okay. I hope you see it. The black and white snake that winds itself on the vertical beam of the D between a vessel containing fire at the bottom and a royal crown at the top of the image. What could that motive stand for? Perhaps it could mean, it could indicate that the process that leads to a new insight or to new insights is a painful one. It is a process that starts from the immediate experience of an individual, of Jung himself, and demands from him suffering experiences. He is boiled, he is exposed to sacrifice and to very painful experiences. That's the blazing fire. Before the royal crown at the top of new knowledge, expressed in a reliable scientific form, can be reached. There is a kind of a progress from this very immediate hot experience to something very calm, ruling over in the expressed.
I can go in close.
You have it here better.
It's a little clearer. I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now we move to the next picture. That's Itztubar. It makes a reference to a subsequent passage and illustrates the encounter of Jung with a powerful being identical with Gilgamesh, as described in that passage. I quote what he says there in the text. "Two bull horns rise from his great head, and rattling a suit of armor covers his chest. The giant is carrying a sparkling double axe in his hand, like those used to strike bulls. This is Itztubar, the mighty, the bull." In this imagination, Jung meets a powerful, awe-inspiring male face to face. He kneels down at the edge of the picture in a worshipful attitude. You see it at the bottom of the picture, in front of the mighty being. The broad shoulders, like those of a Roman legionnaire, characterize it. On them appears a head armed with bull's horns. Symbolically speaking, it evokes an immense spiritual, creative potential with these horns. It refers to fertile ideas and to the generative spiritual power of imagination. The figure of the hero is wearing a red garment, you see, on which appears a kind of Egyptian-like signs, hieroglyphics. It suggests an enigmatic script and cryptic meaning. Perhaps we could see in it also a symbol of the living material of the myth that this creative spirit of the Mediterranean generated and with which it has to, so to say, clothed itself. It's a self-conscious spirit which it by itself simultaneously affirms and negates. The figure is shown armed with a double axe, symbolizing separation, splitting, judgment, and differentiation. Through such differentiating action, the mere fact of being and the blind worldliness, as suggested by all these crocodiles, give birth to a blue clearing into which the light of a meaning can occur. It is a blue background. It's full with fantastic winged snakes. Apparently, Jung's imagination has encountered a symbolic personification, we could say, of mythical thinking. Itztubar represents that in this image. an embodiment of the mythical dimension. He's filled with wonder and awe, Jung, in front of its power and size. But he is aware that a powerful adversary has grown up. Adversary, enemy to this mythical thinking, and that's Western science, modern scientific thinking. There are wonderful passages where he is in a dialogue with this Itztubar figure, where slowly he discovers that, or Itztubar discovers in the imagination that he is poisoned by this Western thinking, the Western rationality. Itztubar shrinks and gets interiorized then as an inner fantasy. So this means that the world and culture creating mythical factor becomes then an intrapsychic reality. It's no longer a dominant factor ruling over culture and civilization, but it's an inner reality. The next picture here. It's in reality a little bit less dark than it appears here. It's beautifully realized from a technical point of view. Its 6 conical shapes create an optical effect of the kind that one can find that's good, in mosaics. We discover here an unusual double perspective. We can see the flat circles, and then there's a kind of a background to them. We can say that the picture has a mandala character that comes from the depth of the field. We see not only the surface, but also its origin. We look behind these circles. We go into the depth behind them. We see not only the immediate tangible reality of the foreground with the circular shapes made of these mosaic-like elements, but also the luminous layers behind. Their spiritual, transcendental background, so to speak. We could say that we are shown the metaphysical ground of reality, what lies behind the physical. One can clearly see that that in this meta-psychological realm of the depth behind the physical or psychological level of reality, there is an encounter between the upper blue, we make it bigger, the blue cones, and the lower green ones, and they come into contact. Perhaps we could say that the pole of spirit, if we refer to the blue, and consciousness, characterized by this color, and the pole of nature, represented in green, end up touching each other. This corresponds exactly to the idea of a unus mundus, of a unity of the world, which Jung developed later with the notion of synchronicity at its very center. In the middle of the picture, however, we have 2 cones of different sizes which do not touch each other. The big one is anchored in the top part of the picture, the smaller one in the bottom part. The upper cone with its yellow-orange luminosity could perhaps evoke the realm of spiritual transcendence. It leads to the high realm. The lower one, with its warm red color, could on the other hand evoke an opposite kind of transcendence, one that has to do with emotions and passions, the realm of the demonic immanence. One could even say the Luciferian realm. These two cones do not touch each other, but seem, on the contrary, to be in opposition to each other. Nevertheless, they are both situated on the central axis of the picture. Because of this, they evoke a kind of a coincidentia oppositorum, a coincidence of opposites. We could perhaps understand this picture as a sort of hymn to the coincidence of fundamental opposites, to their belonging together. It could therefore represent what Jung saw as constituting the deepest reality of the soul, namely a mediating entity bringing the opposites into a relationship as a self-regulating principle. We come to the next image. Well, this is, one can see better. That's a egg-like mandala, which follows a long series of 18 mandalas he has carefully worked out. And that's a kind of the last version of it, the most complex, the richest aspect. It is vertical, pointing downwards, and looks like a huge cosmic egg floating in the waters of the unconscious. The motive of the egg suggests symbolically the idea of something which becoming, creativity, potentiality. It contains within itself the wealth of complex circular shapes reminiscent of fish spawn. All these can evoke the potentialities of creative thinking. So we have here again an image of the self in which, on the one hand, the interaction between inner and outer sphere, and on the other hand, the notion of becoming are meaningful. The notion of becoming is symbolized by the egg shape, by the egg as a symbol, by the spawns, the umbilical cord, which leads to these points outside. And the movement of waves. And the exchange between inner and outer realities, on the other hand, is represented by the connection between the mandala inside and the four outer points. I can actually speak here of a kind of cosmology. We are presented with the description of an inner cosmos, a microcosmos that is connected to an outer macrocosm. The self is here described as a reality sui generis, out of itself, self-generating principle of individuation. As such, it does not simply revolve around itself, isolated, but also includes within itself the substance of the outer reality, described by these four outer points, which are connected from the center of the symbol of the mandala to this outer 4 points. As such, it does not simply revolve around itself, isolated, this mandala, this self, but also includes within itself the substance of outer reality. Individuation is not just a solipsistic self-reflection, but as Jung will say later, it includes the world. We have here already an idea of that. We move forward to the next. That's a mandala which is also commented directly, personally, but by Jung himself.
What page is that?
105.
Well, yeah. He has commented about it in concerning mandala symbolism in Collected Works, Volume 9. I quote, "In the center, says Jung, is a star. The blue sky contains golden clouds. At the 4 cardinal points we see human figures. Together they indicate 4 aspects of the personality. The 2 female figures can be recognized as the 2 aspects of the anima. They are left and right. The old man corresponds to the archetype of meaning at the top, and the dark chthonic figure of the opposite of the wise old man. That's the opposite to the wise old man. The circle enclosing the sky," Jung says, "contains structures or organisms that look like protozoa." That's this green inner circle. The 16 globes painted in 4 colors just outside this circle, derived originally from an eye motif, and therefore stand for the observing and discriminating consciousness. Similarly, the ornaments in the next circle, all opening inwards, are rather like vessels pouring out their content towards the center. And then on the other hand, the ornaments along the rim, just the outer circle, open outwards as if to receive something from outside. This image makes us think of stained glass window of Gothic churches. The mandala has a kind of a luminous quality. It refers to a transcendent center, a glittering star in the dark sky. We can describe it as a divine vessel, so to speak, as Jung says it in another context. In his description, Jung talks about several layers forming part vessels for holding the imago Dei, the image of God. Psychologically speaking, vessels are different modes of conception. One could say that these represent attempts to grasp the transcendent reality of the soul in the vessel of consciousness, or to approach closer to its mystery with the help of the 4 functions of consciousness that are represented in the mandala. We can look at that closer. The innermost circle with the green, single-celled organisms, could correspond to the mode of perception, we could say, connected with sensation. The subsequent circle, with its multiple 4-fold rings, could evoke the differentiated mode of perception of the thinking function. Then we open it a little bit. The next circle, painted in red and formed by symmetrical shapes resembling rose petals, could then refer to the feeling function. And then the ring at the edge of the mandala with the fan-shaped forms open towards the outside would represent intuition. In addition to consciousness, the anima and the animus also appear as vessels for the internalization of the soul and as manifestations of its reality. They are, in Jung's words, soul images which reveal to the ego the existence of a soul reality. So we have these, something which would be container corresponding to the four functions of conscious psyche, and then we have these four figures referring to anima and animus. So it's a kind of a vessel to receive the imago Dei, this image of the divine, with the help of the four functions of consciousness and with the mediation of anima and animus. This seems to be, roughly speaking, a way of looking at the reality of soul suggested by this picture. Now we move on. It's a brighter one. This picture is an image of Jung's new God image, which has emerged from the depths of his soul after a lot of effort. It is the representation of Phanes, as he calls him, a divinity that belongs to the Gnostic tradition. Jung makes this comment about it in the Red Book. I quote, "He, Phanes, is imagined as marvelously beautiful, a figure of shining light, with golden wings on his shoulders. He is of both sexes, since he is to create the race of the gods, unaided. He is described as the brilliant one, a god of beauty and light." In the Black Books, the description of this figure is made in a text that has the quality really of a hymn and that recalls litanies. For instance, Philemon describes Phanes with the following attributes. I quote, "Phanes is the smile of dawn. Phanes is the resplendent day. He is the immortal present. He is hunger and satiation. He is love and lust. He is mourning and consolation. He is promise and fulfillment. He is the joy at every birth. He is the song of joy." The picture represents Jung's attempt to allow the many paradoxical characteristics of his new God image in pictorial form. We see these images, male and female, child and adult, dressed in the precious golden gown of absolute values, and at the same time playful like a harlequin or a doll and friendly to human beings. It is a creative principle which, with its circle of forms, brings forth the multiple potentialities of self-development, a figure that brings forth change and at the same time is simple and multiple. When we consider this person, these characteristics of Phanes closer, we could, I think, see them not only as a representation of Jung's God image, but also of what constitutes the very essence of Jung's genius, I would say. It appears to me like an image of his deepest aims, a representation of the God image that most profoundly determined his understanding of the soul and of the way to approach it. Why so? Jung's conception of the human being and his understanding of psychic reality is inspired essentially by the polarity between the masculine and the feminine. which the image with its androgynous quality is referring. In addition, Jung's psychology favors a mercurial, playful attitude, as seen in his therapeutic goal, for instance, where he aims at a dissolution, as he says, I quote, dissolution of an attitude and the capacity to experiment with oneself. This was his therapeutical goal. And it consists also in stimulating creative energies with the goal of transforming the personality, which is the central idea of individuation. And finally, his concept is determined by the notion of the essentially paradoxical quality of the psychic reality. These specific features of Jung's view of the psyche are well represented here in this God image of Phanes. It provides us with an immediately perceptible representation of the very core of Jung's concept of the soul. Now to a new image. It's a very famous one. It's the largest, the biggest painting in the whole book. It's very special also, not only given its size, but also with the technique. There are two totally different parts in this image, an upper part and a lower part. You don't find that in other paintings. The upper part of the image shows a golden circular mandala-like disc with a red cross and a red circumference, similar to the protuberances of a sun. The mandala-like form sends into the space 8 rays of energy, burning in red and white. The fire expands into the blue sky in a more refined and complex flickering of light. It's very well, nicely done. What could this fire disk stand for? It seems to be like a creative primordial source, an absolute divine beginning, a becoming out of itself. It represents the sun-like active force of the self, which acts out of itself, bringing forth life. It consolates developments and it generates knowledge. The proximity of this creative factor par excellence triggers a fascinating wealth of insights out of nothing, enthusiasm and awe. It points to the future while remaining grounded in its eternal sameness. Not accidentally, this image is just opposite to the chapter entitled The Three Prophecies. As Maria has mentioned, sometimes the images, most of the time, they are not corresponding to the text, but here there is a connection. Here you see die drei Prophezeiungen, the three prophecies. So this image takes up some of the content of this passage. Could it be that with this motive, Jung was picturing the prophetic inspiration, which comes from an immediate experience of the autonomous reality and wisdom of the self? Can also wonder if he expressed here the basic experience he made while working himself on the Red Book. The experience of a tool and vessel for an autonomous process of revelation, providing knowledge of general importance, which later had to be patiently processed in a lifelong, meticulous work of differentiation. Now, opposite to this upper half, we go down with the motive of numinous knowledge. We have a horizontal reality. It's this foreground reality where Jung himself said how important it was for him to be anchored in this everyday life situation, in this structured world. You see, there are a lot of fences and limitations stressed in this lower reality. At the lower right corner, there is a kind of a fortification. This is to protect the world against invaders. There are soldiers below who are making exercise. They stand also, we could say symbolically, for an idea of defending a territory, a country. So these fences, these military references to the military, also the wall around the medieval town, all this is a world structured by limitations. That's one aspect of the reality. And the other is there's a lot of social connection. There are lines, we can't see it perfectly well here on the pictures, but there are phone lines, electric lines, there are means of communication, of transport, collective trains, ships, boats. So there is not only a world, social world, which is defined by separation, limitations, by territory, but also by connecting people together, symbolized by these power lines, electric lines, and so on. So it's a earthy world, horizontally defined, and the vertical world of this transcendent fiery energy. And in between this person, Mercurius-like person, who has on his head a red container. We could imagine that consciously or not, in an intentional way or not, this could correspond to at least what the Red Book meant for Jung and for us probably also. The Red Book was containing a revelation, an inspiration, experience from above, and trying to contain it in the beauty of its text and images, and it's in between this inner experience and the social world of the community where it could be received and heard. Strangely enough, perhaps I go too far in my interpretation, but this person is sitting on a black cushion and holds a red container on his head, and perhaps we know that the basis of his own insights was on this, in the black, what he called the black books, and he worked it then out in the precious container of the Red Book. So why not? This could be also a reference to this reality. So it's very much in this picture what the whole experience of the Red Book is about. It's bringing into a concrete form something he has, Jung, experienced through a lot of suffering, pain, warmth, and overwhelming insights, to bring that into a shape and to later develop it in the realm of concepts acceptable and approachable by the individuals he addressed. I then come to a last picture. That's, as you know, it's Philemon. He is represented here as an old wise man with large wings. The wings, spiritually, symbolically, characterize him as a spiritual being who is capable of moving in the air of imagination, of intuition, and in the realm of transcendence. He can fly like a bird. Thanks to these spiritual powers, he is the father of the prophets, as the inscription in Greek at the top left corner says. Propheton pater, he is the father of the prophets, the very loved Philemon. Philemon is an aspect which moves a person, which moves beyond time. His wings reach from the left to the right, from the past to the future, symbolically, and they reach even further, beyond the borders of time-bound existence. This means they include the dimension of timeless presence. And at the same time, Philemon stands on a historical building, so he unites the dimension of what is to come and the dimension of what has been, the not yet known and the wisdom contained in history and tradition. Jung himself in the Red Book is very much guided by this Philemon-like prophetic inspiration. He is carried on the wings of a most powerful imagination. At the same time, he is standing on the solid basis of tradition. Sonu Shamdasani, the editor of the Red Book, has shown in his many references how much material Jung's book contains, which refers to traditional thought, to alchemy, the Bible, to Gnostic thought, to Eckhart, Nietzsche, and many other authors. So there is also a historical connection. Philemon has also a connection to nature. Jung depicts him as a gardener with an apron full of flower motifs, who is surrounded by an oriental garden. He is in the service of nature. This means he functions as a mediator to what Jung calls the spirit of the depths, to the knowledge hidden in the garden of the collective unconscious. To give up his dependence from the spirit of the time, which has transformed his psyche into a scientific object and into a dead system, as he says, and to discover his soul as a vivid reality speaking through dreams and imaginations, and to follow the renewing spirit of the depths. This is what, for Jung, the whole journey of the Red Book was about. And its guiding spirit and father was Philemon. He represented a spirit beyond rational logic, and that manifested itself in this magical gardening power of the transformation of fantasies and images into insights and into new ideas. So Philemon is the patron of the whole endeavor of the Red Book and the symbolic representation of its main method, the transcendent function. So these are some comments about these pictures.
Steve, could we take maybe 10 minutes to entertain some questions from the audience? We have an audience here. We can gather a few questions from our people. If you have any from your sources on the internet or locally.
Yes, yeah, excellent. First of all, thank you both so much, for those lectures. Those are fantastic. We're looking forward to the parts remaining as well. So for the internet people, go ahead and start thinking about your questions. I've had a few already. Feel free to send in some more. Again, there's that dialogue button that you click on. You might have to exit full screen before you can see the dialogue button. Asheville will ask for a question in a moment. Why don't you start in Zurich, Murray, see if there are questions there, then we'll go around.
Okay. Who would like to address a question to Paul? Any of these pictures or, okay, Mariano?
Just, would you say something about the snake that's...
Question is about the snake in the picture of Philemon.
This last picture.
The snake.
Paul could comment on the snake.
I know it's come before, of course, but...
The snake is very, very important. It always belongs, goes together with Philemon. He is associated with, of course, a knowledge which comes from the depth. It's opposite to the abstract, logical, rational thinking. It's corresponds to a type of spirit which is hidden, which, as you see also in this picture, is very much characterized by dialectical movement. It's not just a straight, unilinear, one-sided way to think. It's a spirit which plays with opposites and mystery and is in the service of a becoming. All these aspects are symbolically contained in the motive of the serpent, which belongs to the Philemon.
So it's very important that the serpent is in this picture with the spiritual figure of Philemon, and also the trees, the vegetation that is very prominent in this picture. Nature, yeah. Another question from here? Anybody have one? Steve, why don't you take one of yours then?
Yes, good. So we've got a number of internet questions. Let's start with Asheville, though. Anybody in the room here have a question at all for Murray or Paul? Any brave souls? Nope, not yet. Let me know if that changes. There's quite a few. Let me start with this one. Has any of the script on the painting been decoded? In particular, page 94. I don't know if you want to look that one up. But a question from Jonathan. Any of the script on the painting's been decoded?
I'll look up page 94 here. Okay.
Frankly, I don't can understand them. there are a kind of imitation of hieroglyphs, but it's not clear what Jung wanted to express with that. So,
to my knowledge, also they have not been. It has not been decoded. I know some people have made attempts at it and have compared it to various kinds of other mystery writing or esoteric kind of coded messaging. But as far as I know, nobody has broken this code. So that would be a challenge to the audience. Somebody could come up with a key. Because quite a few, here's another one on page 95. You see, it's a little clearer. But it doesn't look like any kind of language that I've ever seen before, and maybe it's a kind of private code that Jung had, or he was referencing some sort of hieroglyphic language that he had come across in his studies. It's very unclear. Not known. Not known to date.
There's another question about page 89, exact same question about hieroglyphics code on page 89. I'm assuming that's the same answer, that it's unclear. Then a related question I've seen a few of, which is one of the, let's see if I can find it. What do you make of the extraordinarily minute detail he puts into most of his work, which I've been struck with as well. When you look at those pictures, just the detail is extraordinary. The amount of time he spent in these teeny little lines
It's
everywhere.
truly amazing. Let me just show this picture, for instance, this one. This is on page 155. And if you look at the human figures on here, it doesn't come across quite so clearly on the screen, but there's an enormous amount of detail in this picture. And I know if you take a magnifying glass to some of these pictures, it's extraordinary what will come out. Maybe if I get in closer to some of this. For instance, those little figures. You see there's writing up there under that angel. There's a script right there under that angel. And you'd need a magnifying glass to bring that out, but the attention to this kind of detail in the pictures, these little markings on the stones, where the cement would go in the stones, is quite astonishing.
It's astonishing in terms of technique, the mastery of technique, which is really surprising. It shows an enormous, amazing technical mastery, but I think I'm always personally impressed by the fact that he invested so much time and energy in such a thing which was not intended to be published. I mean, it's really a kind of a work to his soul. It's an incredible amount of energy
for himself.
For soul, it's sort of like a meditation. Like people meditate just sitting, and he meditated by painting.
Yeah, right.
But it's a meditation exercise probably, but it also shows his dedication to this work.
Or a worship.
A kind of a worship, yeah. So it's technically very gifted, very amazing, and at the same time an expression of his deep respect for this material.
Yeah, thank you for zooming in with that. You can zoom out if you want to go back, but that's good. There are lots of comments now. I might just read one or two of them and see if there's any comments before we go back to Murray's talk. This one's interesting. The ship on the ocean seems to represent Jung's search for the unconscious. The fences and the protection of the town seem to represent his firm standing in the world while he ventures into the unconscious. Do you see the ship as Jung searched for the unconscious?
The ship from the first.
The first ship, yeah, in the first drawing.
Or the ship with the, you could also be referring to that mandala of the sun kind of going out. I forget if there were ships
There's a
in
ship,
that
if you
city.
go back
I
to the
think
picture
there was
before
too.
this one, Paul. The ship on that, yeah, that one. There's
Yeah.
a ship, yeah.
Well, here we have also a ship on this one, yeah, at the left in the background. Of course, the ship is a vehicle to reach new countries, new land. So it can refer to the method to his own process of experiences, which brought him to discover new things. We have this boat, this ship in the beginning of the whole journey. We have it here at a later moment in the whole process. It shows that there is a continuity in his exercising or in his experience of being, of journeying, of traveling through in the medium of the unconscious and discovering new land and new experiences. So this is the image, the symbolic image of the ship is, we could say, showing the method as such of writing a book, making pictures. That's a way how he could advance in his own inner process.
Do we have time for one more question, or do you want to go forward, Murray?
Go ahead, one more.
Okay. This one is from John Atkinson, who was also the gentleman who prepared those slides, I think, that you first showed at the beginning.
That's right.
John, I just met. He's a neat guy. He asks, on page 154, so I'll let you turn to page 154 in your textbooks. And John says, would Paul comment on what Jung is holding in his hand, the glow emanating? Is this the self, in quotes, or the philosopher's stone? Page 154. Is that Philemon? Is that the Philemon?
That's Philemon. Yeah.
That's
Philemon. Okay,
yeah.
I didn't realize that. So what's in his hand that's glowing? Is that the self?
That could be the philosophical stone, the new inner awareness, the new precious orientating self. Here on this big version of the, one sees better what it has. In reality, it's very difficult to distinguish if it's a fire, if it's a light, if it's a stone.
Looks like a light, really, doesn't it?
But it's particularly
Circular light, looks like.
It's enlightenment which comes from the very center of this
From
filament.
this solar plexus
Yeah.
area. And
It's perhaps less described as the stone, but it's a source of light, which doesn't come from outside, but which comes from the very center of the heart.
You said before he is a gardener, or
Yes.
and to me I see this little heap of dirt coming, just
yeah.
there from. So almost like he holds some dirt in his hands, and that glows, and that's the union of spirit and matter, or
That's a beautiful,
luminature.
Yeah,
it's
good.
a beautiful way to look at
It
it.
looks like his hands are sort of dirty, too.
Yeah.
Digging in the
Oh,
ground.
that's right. Huh?
And you see all the plants and flowers on his breastplate there.
Doing all these paintings, of course, was also an experience of using dirty material, painting, but it's an incredible amount of insight of light coming out through what his hands knew and did. So it's light coming out of the dirt, which is a very alchemical idea.
Yes.
And I think the name Phanes also means light, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So the God image does have to do with light, a new God image, a new light in the darkness, something like that.
Well, thank you so much. I know I said that was the last question. I'm going to ask one more, though, and then I'll let Murray get on with his talk. This is from Crete Brown, who asks, I'm a psychotherapist and doctoral candidate interested in the recovery of indigenous consciousness. I see many indigenous images in Jung's work, as well as his references to the archaic. For example, the twine snakes are reminiscent of Quetzalcoatl.
Quetzalcoatl, it's
Aztec.
Aztec.
Anyway, the plumbed serpent of indigenous Mesoamerican spirituality. Themes of death and rebirth are deeply integrated into the Plains Indians' Day 4 Sundance. His use of the circle with 4 directions is very consistent with the medicine wheel. Do you have any comments on all this? Oh, that was well worded.
You know, quite a bit of work has been done on this by Jerome Bernstein, who wrote a book called Borderlands, and he has several chapters in there relating Native American mythology, ritual practices, and so on to the archetypes and Jungian theory and so forth. But what Jung would say in response to that question is, yes, what he tapped into in his explorations of his own psyche hit into an archetypal level, so that the pictures he painted and the images that came to him and some of the processes that he was involved in would be found among peoples throughout the world. That's the very definition of an archetype, that it appears spontaneously in minds of people, whatever their culture, whatever their historical period, wherever they are. These motifs will spring up spontaneously in the imagination of all peoples at all times. And so these correspondences that you find are not necessarily, although they also could be taken from Jung's reading, which was very extensive. He had a period of preparation before he did the Red Book in which he studied world religions, mythologies of all kinds, and he does go quite extensively into North American native mythology in his book on symbols of transformation that he wrote just previous to the Red Book period. So the way I think about this is that his unconscious his psyche was filled with imagery and ideas and material that he'd picked up in his library. And you can find many references to images and ideas in the Red Book in his library. But it's sort of as though he's sitting in his library and the books come to life for him. Mm-hmm. And the figures that he's been reading about suddenly appear to him, and he enters into a process and into a dialogue with them. And this journey, it's partially a journey through his library, through his learning, really presents him with insights into a process through experience that you don't get usually by just reading books. You know, it isn't his intellectual knowledge base was vast. The active imaginations are often related to this material, but they come to him in the form of experience. They aren't exactly the same as you read in books. They aren't quotations necessarily. There are quotations also in the Red Book. But these figures come alive and relate to each other. And there's a whole process, as Paul was saying about the snake, a dialectical process, a meandering, a movement through these images that is transformative for him. So you will find there are references to East Indian literature and mythology in the Red Book. There are direct references to the Upanishads. There are references to Mithraic religion and Orphism, and Phanes was an Orphic god. But it's a mistake to reduce these figures in the Red Book to their sources. Rather, you can see the sources as feeding into Jung's imagination, which then picks them up and does something very new and fresh and meaningful with them. Sometimes I speak about creative reading, or reading with your active imagination. It makes the text come alive in a new and different way. In a sense, that's partially what Jung was also doing. So the material in the Red Book isn't like pure unconscious material. It's on the fringe of consciousness. He's put it in there through his studies, and figures like Philemon are references also to figures like Zarathustra that he read, deeply in Nietzsche. These are prophets. These are figures from another realm, from another world, and they come to you and they speak to you. But it's a very individual experience, on the other hand. And that's the important thing to keep in mind about the Red Book. It really is uniquely Jung, although there are references to all kinds of other things in there. Do you want to add anything to that, Paul?
I completely agree. And this figure of Philemon shows it perfectly well what you are saying. I think if we could make it a little bit bigger, you see that it's a figure which is standing on a historical old building, so that there is a connection to the traditional thought. It's one could say there is a kind of a continuation or belonging or referring to a historical reality. And at the same time, it's something totally new. You see with this fire or this light he holds in his hand, it's something like a spirit of giving a life, new meaning, a real actual enlightening of something which is also historically mediated. So this connection between archetypally given through the depth of his archetypal experience, and on the other side the reference to historical knowledge and to that tradition. This is paradoxically united in this figure also of Philemon.
Okay, Steve?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Well, there's still a number of questions, but why don't we hold off that for a while? I think, Murray, you've got another segment to talk about before we do so.
We can put that inside.
Yeah. I'm going to shift gears a bit, although sticking with pictures. And yeah, you can zoom into that picture. That's called the Systema Munditotius. And what I want to talk about is a more rational aspect of what Jung was doing during the Red Book period. Because for the most part, the impression one gets from reading the Red Book is that he was engaged with a fairly deep, irrational, you could say lunar process in which images appeared and he engaged them and they disappeared and another one appeared, and there are some continuities and some discontinuities. But he also had a very strong need to put things in order and to understand them. And I want to look at this first mandala that he created in 1916 as a map, or what I call a psychograph, a map of his psyche as he experienced it and as he organized it. Now he gets the material through his experiences in bits and pieces. A chunk comes here, a chunk comes there. But his rational mind also needs to create some order. And this ordering of experience, of course, is equally archetypal. Oh, we just lost. Do you still see the picture there? Okay. Is equally archetypal to a lot of the images that come to him spontaneously. The seeking for order and the creation of order, the making of maps, is a basic human function and process. And you can see this in cosmographies and cosmograms throughout history. I have some examples here. If we could get this online again, I could show a few, maybe the next picture, see if it comes on. The history of Western thought, you see quite a few depictions of the cosmos. And they're various. Usually the Earth is at the center and the sun is rotating around it, and there's something else in the heavens and the stars. Here in this picture you see representations of the astrological constellations. And all of this is a way of creating a cosmos that is a sense of an ordered world and universe around ourselves, and we put ourselves into it. And what a map or a cosmograph does for us is locates us within a much larger picture. Where do we belong in relation to the higher orders, to the gods and the demons, or the heaven and hell and the stars and the universe? And cosmology is an attempt to understand how all this came into being, and the cosmograph is a map of how it all exists at the moment. And so what Jung is doing in his Systema Mundi Totius is creating what I call a psychograph. It is a graphic representation. If we could go back to maybe focus in on, come into the Systema Mundi Totius again for a second.
And Murray, can you let us know what page that is? If that's the Red Book, people are following along.
Yeah, that's in the Red Book on page 364. It's in the appendix, page 364. And Jung created this mandala in January of 1916. There are a couple of preliminary sketches that you see in the pages just before that. Over here on this page, for instance, there's a preliminary sketch of the Mundi Totius, Systema Mundi Totius, that he was doodling with and playing around with in December. And then he gets around to painting the finished product in January. Now this comes right at the moment that all the ghosts return from Jerusalem and clamoring at his door for attention, and Philemon appears, and you got the 7 sermons to the dead. So this is in a very highly charged moment in Jung's inner experience and explorations. And here in this psychograph, you get a mapping of the entire psyche as he has experienced it, will experience it, and he's putting it into order. Now, I want to go through the various pieces of this and just show you, and they relate very much to what Paul was saying a little bit ago. If you focus on this top part. If you could, can you come into just this section up here? And maybe we can, on there, I need to look at that a little further. Next. Yeah. Next one. Okay, wait, go back to what Jung says about the Systema Mundatotius is it shows the polarities of the microcosmos within the macrocosmic world and its polarities. Well, this is what he's intending with this. This is a very conscious creation. This was not a vision. His thinking function is working. He's putting things into order. And he's taking some of the experiences that he's had and he's going to drop them into this map and show you how he understands this whole thing to hang together. So the Systema Mundatotius means system of the whole world, is how the polarities of the microcosm are reflective of the macrocosmic world and its polarities. So now if we can come in close to this top, there we are, just this piece up here. What you have up there is you have a group of 4 figures, what he calls erikapaios or phanes. That's the little figure in the egg with the wings on it. And the names in Greek on either side of it indicate who that is. That's its identity. Secondly, there's a candelabra with 7 flames, and the words standing beside it, ignis, or Latin word for fire, and eros, the Latin word for love. So this is just under phanes. This is the fiery principle. And then to the right, or to the left, to the right there is a figure called Ars. It's a winged serpent or a worm. And to the left there is a figure called Scientia or Science, humorously shown as a winged mouse.
Oh, that's what it is.
And about phanes, Jung says, at the top is the image of a youth in a winged egg, erikapaios or phanes by name, and thus reminiscent of Orphic deities as a spiritual image. Now here's a specific reference. Paul was talking about phanes as a very important figure, the new God image for Jung. And where does Jung put this figure? He puts it at the top of the psychograph. And he says it is reminiscent of the Orphic deities as a spiritual image. Okay, so he's putting phanes in a place. Then about the other figures, he says, included, there is a tree of light. These are comments that Jung himself made about the Mundatotius. Included, there is a tree of light in the form of a 7-flame candelabra with a relationship to fire and love. Its light is directed upwards toward the spiritual world of the divine child. That's phanes. Art and science also belong to this spiritual world. So the first is presented as a winged serpent and the other as a winged mouse, as a hole digger. Science digs holes. The lamp rests on the principle of the spiritual principle of the number 3. Twice 3 flames with a great flame in the middle. So here you have, in the mandala, at the top, you've got phanes, the spiritual principle. You've got art and science, high intellectual and artistic attributes of the human being. And in the middle, you've got this flame with arrows, fire of arrows burning. All of this is at the upper level of the mandala. Okay. Now, can we go to the next? Now we go to the bottom figure. In the lower region, we find a correspondence to the upper. The upper is purely spiritual, and the lower is the corresponding level at the bottom. We could call the upper one our higher self. Now we come to the lower self. What's in the lower self? Down here, he puts the figure named Abraxas. You see the name of Abraxas, Dominus Mundi. Abraxas is the ruler of this world. The figure Abraxas is a very powerful deity in Jung's lexicon, rules this world, the spirit of this times, the material world. That's Abraxas. There's a tree of life growing up out of, just above Abraxas, the tree of life. And there's a monster on the left called an ungeheuer, a monster, and a grub, worm on the right. Engerling, he calls that. That's an Engerling. Now, about this set of pictures, he writes, its darker opponent, that is, the opponent of the spirit on the top, Phanes, in the depths, is shown here as Abraxas. He represents Dominus Mundi, the lord of the physical world, and is a world creator of a polarized nature. From him sprouts the tree of life with the title Vita, life. The lower world of Abraxas is characterized by the number of the natural man, 5, twice 5 points on his forehead. The accompanying animals of the natural world are a devilish monster and a worm. These point to death and rebirth. So the bottom of the Munditotius is the natural human being, the instinctual Abraxas, this world. And this is in a strong tension and contrast to the upper world. So can we go on to the next picture? Now if we look at the left side, there's a second axis that runs through the picture from the horizontal axis. And this is equally tension-filled to the vertical axis. On the left side of the picture, we see several figures arranged in what look like orbits. These are orbits that circle around the Munditotius. There's a phallus with a serpent wound around it, coming out of the Munditotius. There's the moon, Luna, and Satanus, Satan. There's a kind of very dark sense here, Satanus, Luna. And further on from that, there is a snake, or darkness. I think darkness and emptiness. Now, of this region, Jung writes as follows. This is on the left side. Another dimension of the mandala is the horizontal. On the left side, there emerges the serpent, which is entwined around the phallus, the fertilizing principle. It is light and dark and is directed toward the dark world of the earth, the moon, and the abyss, therefore named Satanus. So this left side is also associated with the masculine principle, and it tends downward toward Abraxas, toward the instinctual and the natural man. Okay, that's the left side of the picture. Then on the right side, in a powerful tension to this, you see images of a dove. You see the wings of the dove, that white dove, then a chalice, and then the sun, as opposed to the moon on the other side, all tending toward fullness or pleroma off to the right of this. Now of this side, Jung writes, the light side of fullness lies to the right, where out of the bright circle, the dove of the Holy Spirit arises and pours wisdom out of a double vessel to the right and left. This feminine spirit is that of the heavens. And this side, he says, tends upward. The right side tends toward the higher regions, upward toward the heavens, toward Phanes, toward the light, toward the spiritual. And this side is feminine as opposed to the masculine. So the horizontal tension is between the masculine on the left side now and the feminine on the right side. And interestingly, the feminine tends toward the spiritual, upward toward phanes, and the masculine tends downward, phallic, instinctual, downward toward abraxas. And the whole thing shows a strong tension between spirit and instinct, or body instinct on the one end toward the lower regions and in the lower regions, and spirit and archetype in the upper regions. Now in the Systema, Jung is sorting out the tendencies shown by the various figures he's confronted in the Red Book. So Elijah, for instance, is a wisdom figure. He is very much of the upper regions, logos, understanding, art, whereas his counterpart, Salome, is very, very much an eros figure. She would indicate she isn't exactly an upward tending figure because she's blind. She has to be redeemed because she's rather trapped in the dark world. And yet Jung is saying that she belongs with the prophet. And he's very puzzled by that in the conversations with Elijah. Why is Salome with you? She seems so erotic and so instinctual and so much of the earth. And he says, no, she belongs with me from eternity. She's always been with me. And so that indicates that in Jung's mind, the feminine really tends toward the upper and belongs more to the upper circles, the bright side, whereas the phallic, of course, when the phallic man sees Salome dancing the dance of the seven veils, he immediately is moved to a descent toward abraxas and toward the fertilization principle of the phallic. Then at the center, maybe we could see the next slide. Now if you focus in on the center, come right into the middle of the picture, here, if you can focus in on it. At the center of the picture, there are a series of concentric circles. And these should be imagined as going ever further inward. There's a movement down and in to an infinitely tiny center point. And of this, Jung writes, the inner circles of the Systema, the greater circle, which is characterized by points and beams, presents an inner sun within this sphere where the macrocosm is repeated so that above and below mirror one another. These repetitions are infinite, to be thought of as ever smaller until the innermost center is reached, the true microcosm. And so the entire mandala is really held together or anchored by this very dense center point. It's a center of gravity for the mandala as a whole. But you want to ask, what really is this center? What is Jung referring to here? He calls it the microcosmos, and he refers to a macrocosmos. And yet we know that the whole Systema is, in a sense, his microcosmos, his inner world. It's a depiction of the psyche as he has experienced it and is now arranging its pieces into tensions above and below and right and left. So the macrocosmic is mirrored in the microcosmic, and I've thought some about that, and he wants to say that the imago Dei and the inner world of the human is a kind of repetition or a reflection of the archetypal world without the world of being as such, that we are one more instance of infinite being. And I think what he's trying to say here is that in the Munda Totius, these outer regions also represent structures of being that are beyond the human psyche, being as it shows itself in all kinds of other structures in the cosmos. And as we go ever inward, down, circling down into the center, we find that the inner world is a reflection of this outer world, that the inner world is equally impersonal and archetypal as the macrocosmic world is. And as I understand this Systema Mundi Totius, it's a kind of middle term attempt on Jung's part, on his thinking function mostly, or his intellect, to put these pieces together and to create a map for himself so that he can orient himself and feel contained within this huge welter of material that's bubbling up from underneath in his active imaginations. It creates order. Now this order that he creates in the Mundi Totius, of course, is going to stay with him in a sense for the rest of his life. All of his writings, later writings about the opposites and the tensions, the polarities within the self, are already shown in this Mundi Totius in 1916. He creates some other versions of it. Paul showed some pictures of the star. He puts the star in the center. That's clearly a reference to the transcendent core of the human soul, that it reaches out to something beyond itself, to infinity, that the human is really a place where the infinite and the finite come together in the psyche, and at the core of the psyche it reaches out to the infinite, and is after death, as the seventh sermon to the dead says, after death the soul is meant to go back to the star from which it originates, goes back into its native wholeness. So there is this sense that at the center of the microcosm, right inside this Mundi Totius, there is this point of contact between the finite and the infinite, so that the human being is a kind of recapitulation of something infinite, something archetypal and impersonal, as personal as we feel about our lives, and of course they are very personal too, but at its core we belong to the world and to the unus mundus and to the cosmos. So there's a kind of, in this psychogram, which is the Mundi Totius, there is a kind of cosmogram too. The cosmos is represented, the tensions in the cosmos, but mostly it's a psychological map. And this then is laid out in a much different way, in a much more theoretical and abstract way, in the late 1940s when he writes Ion. And in the chapter on the self, he reaches back to Gnosticism and he creates these hexagrams. I think they're hexagrams, aren't they? Or these pyramids, and stacks the four levels of the psyche, one on top of the other, to show that the upper and the lower descending down into matter, down through the tree of life, down through Abraxas, down through the elements and the material world, in the end also touches, because he then creates a circle of it, touches the highest point, the spiritual point, which would correspond to phanes in the Mundi Totius. So again, he has the highest and the lowest connected in attention, but also at the end of the day, he would say they are both aspects of a single unified archetypal world. So I think the Mundi Totius is his first real approximation to a map of the psyche. I wrote a book some years ago called Jung's Map of the Soul. And he does have a map-making mind. He wants to chart the territory. He wants to show you how the pieces are arranged in oppositions and polarities, how you can descend from one level to another level, and heal the splits that occur through the process of becoming acculturated and conscious and belonging to the world of our times. There is a way to reconnect to these other levels, which is what he's exploring in the Red Book. So I wanted to share those thoughts with you about the Systema Mundi Totius as a map of the soul. I call it a psychograph. And It's a first approximation. Find it in the appendix to the Red Book. It's not, he didn't put that graph in the Red Book. He didn't paint it into the Red Book. It's an extra, it's on the side. I think he stepped out of the Red Book for a bit to try to put the pieces together. And then when all hell broke loose and the ghosts appeared from Jerusalem unsatisfied and he had to open the door to them, it all started up again and Philemon appeared again, and then you get that last rush of energy that is shown in the closing chapters of Scrutinies, which is really a kind of high point in the whole process. This is a kind of middle stopping point to survey the land and see if you can make some sense out of it in a more thinking way. You know, maps are thought objects. They're created by human beings. They aren't visions. They aren't experienced directly. You have to make them. And a map is useful to orient you and to contain you. Of course, it can also be misleading. Maps can not be accurate. They can lead you down a garden path. They can lead you into a dead end if they aren't correct. Or they can lead you to overlook aspects that aren't included on the map. You know, you overlook some details. So maps can be useful, but they aren't also the journey. They're maps. They can help you, they can guide you, help you understand what the territory is, maybe, and orient yourself, but you still have to go on the journey. It doesn't replace the journey. So do we have more questions? We have about a half an hour left for discussion and questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we start with Asheville? We'll get a question here first, and then we'll go to Zurich, and then hit some email questions. Feel free to keep sending email questions in. We've done quite a few. Again, just hit that comment little button when you exit full screen on your web viewer. Go ahead, Asheville, ask a question. Yeah, make sure it's green. Is there a green light on? Is it lit? Okay, yeah. Yeah, right. Doesn't matter.
Do you have advice on how someone goes from being in the grip of that kind of energy and the overwhelming feeling behind it to an image that can be worked with or dialogued with? I can only speak for myself, but so far it's just been overwhelming.
We didn't hear the first part of that question. I think we got the gist of it, but if you could just repeat the first bit.
Okay. I asked if either one of you had advice on how to go from being in the grip of the overwhelming energy behind these kinds of images to the actual image itself, because so far for me personally, it's been overwhelming, but I'm not able to understand what it wants.
What one could perhaps recommend is to behave the same way as Jung did. He just felt very much overwhelmed himself by these images, the fantasies, these deep experiences, and the only way, he says that in the end of the Red Book, the only way he found to protect himself against being totally lost in it was to give it a visual form, to express it through images, the experience, the feeling he had. So this is not only just to document the experience, it was also a way to protect himself against the overwhelming energy of it. So the image, which is the reality of soul, the image is a way to contain this energy and the content, and to reduce it to something which is understandable, perhaps, or at least you can objectify, you can put it in front of you, and if possible even to understand it. But the very important thing is to create a container for it. So
Yeah, I think the Red Book has been called a container. It contains Jung's psyche because he needed a container. And so this process of being involved with the fantasy figures and the active imagination process, and then reflecting on them, drawing pictures, painting, creating the book, all of that went into containing and making meaningful what was happening to him. And it's a long process. It started in 1913 and he went on until 1930, basically. So you're talking, about a 10, 12-year process of holding this material together. And then after that, of course, he took all of this material and turned it into another form in his theoretical writings and his other work. The other thing I would say is if you have this experience of being overwhelmed, a therapeutic relationship is a container also, to be able to talk to somebody else who has had some experience with the unconscious, can see its value and not reduce it to pathological forms, and be able to work with it with you and help you contain it. And I think that would help. Marianne, would you like to say something? Because you used images so much. Marianne Tauber has written a book called The Soul's Ministrations. And it's an account of her experience of going through a very deep process of following her husband's gradual increasing illness through his death, and what was coming up in you during that time, and the images that helped you to, and the way you worked with images. Would you just like to say a brief word about that?
Actually, my experience was maybe in a way the contrary of what we just heard about. Jung was so overwhelmed with material and overwhelmed with images. I sat sort of in the void. I had experienced the loss, like the world had broken down. And in that, the way I found the method of painting I found was sort of like similar to a Rorschach ink blot, and which I smeared colors, I folded it, and whatever came out of the dried paint, the image I perceived at the moment, I picked that up and finished it and related to it. And so it's like finding an object in the chaos that helped me at the time.
Exactly, and then working with the images that came to you out of this inkblot process and reflecting on them and weaving them together.
That came many years later, actually. At the time,
exactly,
I just responded with a poem, and then these images had their own momentum. It's like the next one to come and the next, so that was how it unfolded. It was like the image then, or what the soul ministered to me the next day or the next day, I responded to, and some 15, I lost my voice, some 15 years later, I reflected on the images and what they meant symbolically and alchemically.
And you wrote a book about it. So, I mean, what you get in these experiences with these images can be so valuable for your whole life. These are symbols, and they will speak to you 10, 20, 30 years from now. When you look at your pictures, they still have a life and a value for you to capture, contain that experience, but also add something to the experience and deepen it. There was another question there somewhere, I think.
We have one more question here, Asheville, and then maybe we'll go to Zurich and the internet. Carl, go ahead.
Yes, I belong to a Asheville Jung discussion group, 4 years old. We spent our first year studying individuation. We're now looking for an image to use on a printed flyer that will represent individuation. So in the images we've seen and that you've discussed, and maybe another, could you point to several images that would represent strongly individuation?
Well, one question is if it's useful to use it as a design then afterwards, but the image of the self, what comes to my mind is just what you have developed now with this map of the soul. If individuation is also a process of coming closer to synthesis, to a wholeness, as Jung said, a map with this circular form, which all the differences in the aspects that would be wonderfully fitting with what he means by the individuation process, leading to this centering and to this becoming more complete, the circle and the center. That's for sure an image connected to the idea of the individuation, but also among the pictures I commented, of course, the mandala in the egg form is also an image of the self. Then this other mandala, Jung has commented himself, all kinds of round, circular, integrative images are connected to the symbol of the self and to the movement towards the self, individuation.
Yeah, I think if you'd want to represent the process, you might use that first one, going on the journey.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the beginning of a process. You could say that all the pictures together in the Red Book represent the individuation process of one person at a certain period in his life. And then there are pictures that show you the outcome, maybe the product. Those would be the mandalas, the wholeness that is sought after, the goal of the individuation process. The only reason I would stay away, I would differ from Paul in this sense, that if you take a finished picture, a round picture, it's very static and it shows everything in the form of a map. Whereas the process itself, as Jung says in one place, I can't remember where it was, but is serpentine. It winds, it backtracks, it goes up the hill and it goes down the dale, and you repeat. And sometimes he used the image of a spiral or a serpentine path, a labyrinth. Things like that suggest the uncertainty of individuation also. You never know if you've fallen off the path or not. You know, you have moments of enlightenment, you have moments of darkness, you have regressions, you have exaltations, you've got everything in the process. It's a journey. And so for myself, I think of images that depict journeys with all their adventure, their danger, their risks, their uncertainty. Jung said individuation is an experiment. Paul was talking about that you treat your life as not as a rigid, fixed, to be protected at all costs, hedged around with defenses object to secure from birth to death, but as a journey, an adventure full of risks, uncertainties, dead ends. So if I were choosing a picture, it would have to say something like that, that it's got all those kinds of elements in it. I look on the Munditodius as a very important orientation symbol. It shows the right and the left and the up and the down and the center, and it's very, very useful for orienting yourself. Where are you on the individuation now? Are you on the left side heading down toward Abraxas? Are you on the right side heading up toward Phanes? Are you off center? Something like that. It's, where are you in your process? Can be helpful for something like that. Can also be helpful to therapists to know where some clients are in their individuation and not freak out if they're going in a direction that seems very risky, but maybe it's necessary. And therapists know that without risk-taking there is no individuation. You have to be willing to go with Hermes sometimes. Hermes is a gambler. And sudden gains and sudden losses.
Any questions in Zurich?
I have a question to you.
Yeah. Okay, good.
In this map of Mundus Tortius, is there also a place for evil?
A place for evil, yes. This was, this is Carl Jung, and I'm Victor White, and he's holding out for evil at all costs. He won't let evil go.
Exactly.
And Victor White says, but evil isn't real, Jung insists on including evil in the mandala. It has got to be there. And I think he discovered that in the Red Book period. Maybe not discovered it, certainly affirmed it. There are many, many passages that show him struggling with the issue of evil and its necessary inclusion. So Satanas, over there on the left side, tending down toward Abraxas. Good and evil are judgments that we make. It's very questionable that they exist in themselves. There is nature, and we say, well, an earthquake is bad because it shook my house and, flooded our country and so on. We say a beautiful spring day or a shower is nice because the grass can grow and our crops are better. So we make judgments about good and bad. Whether there is such a thing as evil in itself and good in itself is open to question. It's a human judgment. But Jung wanted to say, in addition to that it is a judgment, that there are dark forces in this world and in nature down there at the bottom, Abraxas and the phallic descending toward Abraxas, in that territory, that region, that one should not repress or overlook. One has to include that in life because life also depends on that. Fertilization comes out of that. All kinds of things come out of that region that are necessary for life. And so he's very much opposed to splitting good and evil and pushing evil under the table. Bring it into relation to the light. And I mean, it's very hard to live with the evil in ourselves, with our shadow, with our weakness, with our inferior function, with all that stuff that we'd rather not have, and that we're torn apart and assailed by our neighbors and our wives and our friends from time to time for having, but it belongs to our reality. And if you lop that off, you don't have the full experience of wholeness. You have to make a choice. Are you going for wholeness or are you going for perfection, Jung said. If you go for perfection, you stay up there with Phanes. You can live a very good life, but he says it increasingly becomes sterile because it doesn't have Abraxas. It doesn't have the tree of life. It doesn't have the worm. It doesn't have the imperfection that the earth brings us in all of its multiple manifestations. So, the Mundus Tortius includes that and, in a symbolic form. And Jung holds out for that throughout all of his writings, and in the debates with Victor White, where White tries to go with a philosophical understanding of evil, and so push it away as the absence of good, privatio boni. Jung holds out, no, it belongs to the mandala. It's as real as the upper part. The bottom part is as real as the upper part. You can't just dismiss one side. And I think he's really coming from the Red Book. It isn't a philosophical discussion with White. And so they don't meet each other, really. Yeah.
And the killing of the hero is so important for Jung as a being. This is spirit which is one-sided, which is pointing towards perfection, the clarity. So it's really by killing this one-sidedness, this orientation only towards the right, the good, that life can start.
Opens up.
Opens up.
The possibility,
Thank you. I've gotten a couple questions on the internet about the same image. I'm going to maybe highlight that. Image number 133, if you can open your Red Book, anybody who's got one. So 133, maybe we can zoom in the camera on it as well. And the questions are pretty identical. They're both just general, saying, would you give any impressions of this extraordinary image? And another says, I find this painting intriguing, and could you comment on it in the associated meeting? That's it right there. Can you zoom the camera in on that face? Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's Inca-like a mask with this same technique done with mosaic-like combining bright and darker, light and dark. You see that the eyes of this mask are sun eyes. I don't remember now if that is someone painting. He refers to a figure. To remember that. If that's the one person he.
No, I don't know anything about this figure, except that I think it is an Inca mask. There's probably a footnote on it back here somewhere. But if you look at the eyes, and you look at the previous pictures, you see the this circle with a center of the light in 131, and then you get these eyes, which are quite reminiscent of that. But it clearly also it has this hieroglyph at the bottom. So it represents something of what Jung would call primitive psyche. At the bottom there's hieroglyph. Again, we don't know what that means. And above there is like a planet or something. And it's a very strong image because the eyes stare out at you so strongly. I know there was a lot of interest in masks about that period. Picasso started painting African masks. He painted a famous portrait of Gertrude Stein, and Gertrude Stein looks like a mask, something like this, frozen like this. And Gertrude Stein said to him, "My Picasso, that doesn't look at all like me." And he said, "Just wait 20 years, it will." So the mask is the archetypal essence. Beyond the personal wrinkles and characteristics of a face, it captures something deeply archetypal in the personality rather than personal features. It's not like a photograph. And so I think Jung is working with primitive archetype, lots of image. Here's another all these primitive animals at the bottom of the tree here. This is the Abraxas world down here. This is 135 with the egg, and there you have the upper and the lower realms again. In the lower realm you have the tree, you have the animals, the instinctual world, and above you have the light And so there you have Phanes and Abraxas again represented, the upper and the lower regions.
Once again, the blue star, yeah.
And the blue star, yeah. In that mask, it's sort of just plunked down there by itself. Don't know, there are circles, there's the mosaic, as you say, the blue and the white, and those very stunning eyes looking out at you. It is a very strong picture. What it means, I'm not sure. We'll have to study that some more, I think.
Thank you. There's one comment I'll read that is a bit of an answer to our hieroglyphics. It says page 363 of Appendix A offers basic symbol interpretation for its hieroglyphics. I don't have a red book right here. Carl does. You might look that up.
Page. What is the page?
363, Appendix A.
Well, those are hieroglyphics that refer to this first sketch of the Munda Totius. And those are very clear. Those are depicted in the sketch itself. I've studied that quite carefully. But they don't, to my knowledge, they don't correspond very well to the hieroglyphics, say on 133. I don't think you can use that as a dictionary for those hieroglyphics, because these hieroglyphics are very different images from this one.
I imagine that you have to take these hieroglyphics as, in a symbolical sense, as wanting to say that it's mysterious language, it's a hidden dimension. Yeah. It means something. It's mystery.
Mystery, so and also sort of ancient Egyptian. Yeah. It's symbolic. It's
symbolic.
This is
hidden.
Symbolic. Yeah. It points to the mystery and makes us think. We're puzzled about it. Yeah. What?
I have a question.
We have a question here.
That's fine. Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll probably close after that. But go ahead.
Yes, when I think about Jung taking this overwhelming psychic content and putting it into visual image, I wonder, and I direct this question to either or both of you, what role typology plays, or also the conscious identification either with the feminine or masculine principle. I know for me, when I get image, they very rarely come in visual image, but normally kinesthetic first or auditory, some kind of other image format. And it's actually quite strong for me to get them visually, because I associate that with...
Do you have any comment on that, the typology?
The typology, of course, the way how you relate to images, there your own typology comes very much in. But what is impressive in Jung's way how he treats these images, it's that several functions have enter. I mean, there is this feeling, which is how it's not a distant way to
all
paint.
The color.
All the color, it's a lot of feeling invested. Then there is this thinking also, just in this, what you mentioned with the map. Yep. There's a kind of ordering effort to order things, but there is also a sensation aspect in it.
Very strong. Details.
The details, observations, the use of careful painting, all that's referring to sensation, and also intuition. I mean, it's a fantastic openness to the fantasy,
to the infinite,
to the
intuitive
so
knowledge.
In this sense, all the functions are playing their role or contribute to in this case.
I wonder if one could perhaps do the same thing with, say, a dance performance, of bringing in the sensate and the intuitive, and perhaps bringing that psychic content into choreography or
Absolutely.
into one's writing.
Martha Graham. I'm sure Martha Graham did it.
Joan Chodorow.
Or film. Film would be a magnificent medium for depicting inner process,
Yeah.
as it does. I mean, a lot of films are highly suggestive of individuation process, and I recently saw Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris again for the second or third time, and it's his Red Book experience. He is doing active imagination there. He enters another world. He goes back and forth between worlds. He integrates the worlds. It's fantastic. So I think there are many media that can be expressive of or used for this purpose of individuating. This is a book about individuation. Sonu Shamdasani has said, Jung discovered individuation in the Red Book experience, and I agree with that. I think it's not a theoretical book, it's an experience book, and it's a book of process, and it's transformational. Jung changed as a result of the work that he did and put into the Red Book. He was transformed by it. So these kinds of processes can be depicted in many media and many different ways. So we don't want to limit ourselves to painting, for sure. But Jung's way was, one of his ways was painting, clearly. And I hope we've shown that well enough, Steve.
Apart from creating houses, a tower.
Yeah. Another architecture.
Well, thank you both. Thank you both so much today. This has been just a marvelous experience. And yeah, both of your expertise in these images and the Red Book and the depth of Carl Jung and all he brought to us, it's just so well appreciated. So thank you one more time. All right, June 9th and June 28th are our next ones up, and we'll see you all later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you both.